Before history was written, there were civilizations long forgotten. From the mound cities of the Mississippi to the hidden cliff dwellings of the desert Southwest, their stories were carved in stone, then swallowed by time. But what if the past we know is only half the truth? Welcome to Forgotten Civilization, where we uncover the mysteries, the myths, and the secrets of ancient America's lost worlds. Today, we journey deep into the sun-scorched heart of the American Southwest, to a land where beauty and mystery intertwine. A place of rugged mountains and endless sky, where a forgotten people once painted their souls onto the rock walls of the desert. They were artists, farmers, dreamers, and survivors of a harsh and changing world. This is the story of the Mogollon culture, the forgotten artists of the Southwest. Long before the rise of the great ancestral Puebloan cities like Mesa Verde or Chaco Canyon, another people thrived quietly in the high deserts and pine-covered mountains of what is now New Mexico, Arizona, and parts of northern Mexico. They are known today as the Mogollon, named after the rugged Mogollon Mountains, a name that echoes like a whisper of something ancient, resilient, and untamed. To understand the Mogollon, one must first understand their world. The Southwest is a land of contradiction, blistering heat by day, freezing cold by night, violent summer monsoons followed by months of drought. It is a land that tests the limits of life, and those who survived here became part of the landscape itself. The Mogollon did not build grand temples or pyramids. Their cities were small, their homes humble, yet their hearts and minds were vast. Through their art, pottery, and sacred sites, they revealed a spiritual depth that rivals any of the world's ancient civilizations. Archaeologists believe the Mogollon culture began around 200 CE, evolving from earlier desert peoples who roamed the Southwest for millennia. These early groups were semi-nomadic, hunters and gatherers who learned to cultivate maize, beans, and squash, the three sisters of ancient American agriculture. As the centuries passed, they began to settle near rivers and fertile valleys. They built small pit houses, homes half buried in the earth, with roofs made of wood and brush, designed to keep cool in summer and warm in winter. In these modest dwellings, entire families lived, worked, and dreamed under the same desert stars that still shine over the Mogollon Rim today. The Mogollon were masters of adaptation. They lived where others might perish, in regions too dry for easy farming, too rugged for large-scale settlement. Yet they thrived, using every resource the land provided. They hunted deer, rabbits, and mountain sheep, and gathered seeds, cactus fruit, and wild plants. But what set them apart was their unique balance between survival and expression. Where most ancient peoples of the Southwest left behind structures, the Mogollon left art. Every vessel, every bowl, every shard of pottery they crafted was more than a tool. It was a story, a prayer, a reflection of the desert spirit. The Mogollon pottery tradition is one of the most distinctive in North America. Early Mogollon pottery was plain, brown or gray, utilitarian. But by around 1000 CE, their craft evolved into something extraordinary. They began to paint black-on-white geometric designs, animal figures, and sacred symbols that represented life, death, and the natural world. Each design had meaning: spirals for eternity, zigzags for water, crosshatches for balance. Their pottery was not merely decoration, it was communication, a way to connect with the divine and preserve memory. Even their burial practices were artistic. Mogollon people often placed beautifully painted pottery in graves, gifts for the afterlife or perhaps messages to ancestors. Each piece was hand-built, hand-painted, and deeply personal. In their quiet way, these artists spoke to eternity, and the desert listened. Among all Mogollon communities, one region stands apart: the Mimbres Valley in southwestern New Mexico. Here, the Mogollon reached the height of their artistic expression. Between 1000 and 1150 CE, the Mimbres people produced pottery so detailed, so beautiful, that modern archaeologists call it a masterpiece of prehistoric art. Their bowls were painted with scenes of daily life, hunting, farming, dancing, storytelling, and with mysterious spiritual imagery, humans transforming into animals, celestial beings, and abstract symbols of life and death. Some depict fish swimming in circular motion. Others show people holding hands with animals, suggesting a worldview of unity between all living things. The artistry of the Mimbres bowls was so advanced that each one feels like a window into the soul of its maker. They were not anonymous creations. They were personal statements, signed not with names, but with style, brushstrokes that carried identity and meaning. The Mogollon existed between two worlds, between hunter-gatherers and settled farmers, between survival and spirituality, between the earth and the heavens. Their culture evolved in close contact with neighboring peoples, the Hohokam to the west and the Ancestral Puebloans to the north, but remained distinct. Where others built vast ceremonial centers, the Mogollon found the sacred in simplicity. They did not seek to conquer the desert. They sought to live in harmony with it. Their spirituality was woven into the soil, the rain, the art, and the rhythm of life itself. In the land of dust and silence, the Mogollon learned to speak through art, and their art became their voice across 1,000 years. But who were these mysterious artisans of the desert? And what happened when the land that sustained them began to turn against them? As the centuries passed, the Mogollon people deepened their connection to the land, shaping a way of life defined by resilience, ritual, and rhythm. The desert was harsh and unpredictable, yet they found balance within it, carving existence out of stone and soil. Their homes were simple yet ingenious, built from the materials the earth provided. Early Mogollon families lived in pit houses, circular or oval depressions dug into the ground, their roofs made of wooden poles and packed clay. The half-buried design helped regulate temperature, cool during the scorching summers and warm through the bitter winters. Over time, as their communities grew and their culture matured, the Mogollon began constructing above-ground dwellings of stone and adobe, forming compact villages perched near water sources or nestled within canyon walls. Some of these settlements grew to contain dozens of rooms, the quiet forerunners of the great pueblos that would later rise across the Southwest. Inside these homes, life revolved around the cycles of nature. The Mogollon understood that the desert could be both cruel and generous, and so they treated it with respect. They timed their planting and harvest to the patterns of the sun, the migration of animals, and the rhythm of the rains. Corn was sacred, the lifeblood of their sustenance and their ceremonies. Alongside maize, they grew beans, squash, and occasionally cotton, supplementing their crops with hunting and foraging. They were skilled at storing food in clay jars sealed with mud, keeping it safe through the dry seasons and lean years. In every sense, the Mogollon were masters of adaptation. Their survival depended not on dominance, but on understanding. Daily life was not merely survival, though. The Mogollon infused their routines with meaning and artistry. Every gesture, from grinding maize on stone metats to shaping clay for pottery, carried ritual weight. Women often served as the keepers of the hearth and the creators of art, shaping bowls, weaving baskets, and painting symbols that told the stories of their people. Men hunted and crafted tools from bone and obsidian, but they too took part in the rituals that connected their lives to the cosmos. The Mogollon worldview was deeply spiritual, woven into every element of their existence. To them, the desert was not empty. It was alive, inhabited by unseen forces, ancestors, and animal spirits that guided the living. Their spiritual practices were both intimate and profound. Archaeological evidence from sites such as the Gila Cliff dwellings and the Mimbres Valley reveals ceremonial rooms, altars, and circular kivas, subterranean chambers believed to be entrances to the spirit world. Here, the Mogollon gathered for rituals invoking fertility, rain, or healing. They painted or etched symbols on the walls, burned offerings, and performed dances that mirrored the movements of animals and celestial bodies. These were not acts of worship in the modern sense, but dialogues with the universe, expressions of gratitude and balance. Their ceremonies echoed the eternal pattern of life and death, growth and decay, drought and rain. At the heart of these rituals lay a belief in transformation. Many of the images found on Mogollon pottery and rock art depict humans merging with animals, hunters becoming deer, dancers sprouting wings, or shamans transforming into spirit creatures. This was no fantasy. It was a reflection of their understanding that all life was connected. To take the life of an animal for food was not an act of conquest, but of sacred exchange. The Mogollon believed that by honoring the spirit of what they consumed, they maintained harmony with the natural world. Their art immortalized this philosophy, each painted bowl a window into a spiritual dialogue that transcended time. Within the family, the Mogollon maintained strong communal bonds. Villages operated cooperatively, sharing resources and labor. Elders were respected as keepers of wisdom, and storytelling was an essential thread of their culture. Around the evening fires, stories passed from one generation to the next, tales of creation, of spirits, of the desert's ancient power. These oral traditions became a living memory, preserving their history long after their voices faded. The Mogollons' relationship with their environment shaped not only their survival, but also their sense of identity. They saw themselves as children of the earth, not separate from it, but born of it. One of the most fascinating aspects of their society was their relationship with death. Unlike many ancient peoples who built grand tombs or elaborate monuments, the Mogollon honored death quietly, with grace and symbolism. The dead were often buried beneath the floors of their homes or near the edges of their villages, accompanied by offerings of painted pottery, food, and tools. These burials suggest that the Mogollon viewed death as a continuation of life, not an end. By placing their ancestors close, they kept the past physically and spiritually present within their daily lives. Archaeologists have found graves adorned with beautifully decorated Mimbres bowls, placed upside down over the face of the deceased, the kill hole at the center symbolically allowing the soul to pass into the next world. Each burial, like each piece of art, was an act of reverence, not sorrow. The Mogollons' artistic expression extended far beyond pottery. They left behind remarkable rock art, petroglyphs and pictographs etched and painted onto canyon walls, depicting spirals, animals, and abstract symbols. These images, scattered across the deserts of New Mexico and Arizona, remain some of the most enigmatic visual records in North America. Some show scenes of hunting or dancing. Others seem to represent constellations or spiritual journeys. The meaning of many of these images is lost to time, but their presence speaks to a people who viewed their world as alive with meaning. Every mark on stone, every brushstroke on clay was a dialogue between humanity and nature. Life for the Mogollon was not static. Their villages expanded and contracted with the shifting climate. Families moved with the rains, following the rhythm of the seasons. In times of abundance, communities flourished, their art and architecture reaching new heights. In harder times, they adapted, merging with neighboring cultures, migrating to new regions, or finding new ways to survive. This flexibility became their greatest strength. They were neither empire nor kingdom, but a tapestry of interconnected communities bound by a shared vision of life in harmony with the land. Through their artistry, their spirituality, and their deep respect for nature, the Mogollon people left behind more than artifacts. They left a philosophy. They taught that beauty could arise from hardship, that the simplest acts could hold the greatest meaning, and that art could be both survival and prayer. To walk among the ruins of their villages today, to hold one of their painted bowls or gaze upon their rock carvings, is to feel the presence of minds that still whisper through the silence of the desert. Their story is not one of power or conquest, but of balance, grace, and enduring creativity. The Mogollon did not need monuments to be remembered. Their legacy was written in the wind, the earth, and the fire of their art. And though their voices have been silenced by time, their hands still speak through the patterns they left behind. To truly understand the Mogollon, one must look not at their ruins, but into their art, for in their art they spoke the language of the sacred. The Mogollon were not merely craftsmen, they were storytellers of clay, stone, and pigment. Every line, curve, and symbol they painted was deliberate, a coded message from a civilization that saw no divide between the earthly and the divine. Their pottery, especially the exquisite Mimbres bowls, remains among the most enigmatic and evocative artifacts of the ancient Americas. Painted in stark black and white contrast, these bowls carry scenes of human life, animals, mythic beings, and geometric patterns so precise they seem to hum with rhythm. They are not just vessels for food or water. They are mirrors reflecting the Mogollon mind, windows into how they understood creation, death, and the balance between the two. Each Mimbres bowl was a canvas for storytelling. On one, a pair of fish encircle one another, forming a spiral of life. On another, a rabbit leaps through a field of symbols that resemble stars. Some show human figures engaged in what appear to be ritual dances, while others depict beings that defy categorization, part man, part beast, part spirit. These images, rendered with a confident hand and minimal lines, suggest a profound visual language that transcends simple decoration. To the Mogollon, these were not mere pictures. They were prayers in motion. The repetition of spirals, zigzags, and concentric circles may have symbolized water, wind, or the cycles of the cosmos. Triangles and stepped motifs perhaps echoed the mountains and terraces that shaped their world. Every bowl told a fragment of a grander story, one too vast for any single vessel to contain. One of the most haunting motifs found in Mimbres pottery is the so-called kill hole, a small puncture made in the center of the bowl before it was placed in a grave. To outsiders, it might seem destructive, but to the Mogollon, this act completed the bowl's purpose. The hole symbolized release, allowing the spirit of the vessel to accompany the soul of the deceased into the afterlife. The imagery painted on the bowl, therefore, was not meant for the living, but for the journey beyond. Through these funerary bowls, we catch a glimpse of the Mogollons' beliefs about existence itself, that life was cyclical, that art was sacred, and that creation and destruction were intertwined forces of the universe. The act of breaking or killing the bowl was a gesture of reverence, the same humility they showed toward nature and death. Beyond pottery, the Mogollon expressed their spirituality on the landscape itself. Across the canyons and cliffs of the Southwest, petroglyphs and pictographs carved or painted onto rock surfaces reveal a symbolic world as complex as any written script. Spirals, anthropomorphic figures, sunbursts, and animal forms are scattered across boulders and canyon walls, placed in locations that suggest spiritual significance, near water sources, cave entrances, and cliffs that catch the morning light. These were not random carvings. They were sacred maps, possibly marking places of ceremony, migration routes, or cosmic alignments. Some scholars believe these symbols recorded visions experienced by shamans during trance states, when they crossed into the spiritual realm to seek guidance or healing. Others interpret them as teaching tools, visual stories meant to guide the young or remind the community of ancient truths. Whatever their purpose, these rock messages remain among the most eloquent voices of a people who wrote not with words, but with the language of form and spirit. The Mogollons' use of symbolism extended even into their architecture. The arrangement of their villages, the placement of ceremonial rooms, and even the orientation of their doorways often aligned with celestial events, the rising of the sun at solstice, the movement of the moon, or the patterns of the stars. This cosmic awareness was not for navigation or scientific curiosity alone. It was spiritual synchronization. To the Mogollon, the heavens were a reflection of the earth, and human life was a reflection of both. By aligning their dwellings with the cosmos, they were aligning themselves with the rhythm of creation. Archaeologists have discovered evidence that some Mogollon communities built small observatories or marked stones to track celestial events, hinting at an early form of astronomical understanding rooted in spirituality rather than science. Art, architecture, and spirituality were inseparable, all expressions of the same worldview that sought harmony rather than domination. The Mogollons were not concerned with building empires or conquering lands. Their greatness lay in perception, in the ability to see the sacred woven into every thread of existence. They found meaning in the patterns of feathers, in the spiral of a shell, in the flicker of firelight on painted clay. Their art was both reflection and invocation, a way to maintain balance between human and spirit, earth and sky, creation and decay. This holistic vision placed them among the most introspective of ancient North American cultures, people who may not have left towering monuments but who carved eternity into silence. As the Mimbres tradition flourished between 1000 and 1130 CE, it reached an artistic peak rarely matched in pre-Columbian North America. Villages along the Mimbres River in modern-day New Mexico became centers of cultural exchange and artistic innovation. Here, artisans developed the distinctive black-on-white pottery style that would later captivate archaeologists and collectors worldwide. The refinement of their craft was astonishing. Symmetrical forms, precise brushwork, and narrative imagery that rivaled the visual sophistication of much larger civilizations. And yet, the Mogollon artisans worked not for fame or wealth, but to honor the unseen. Their art was intimate, personal, and sacred, created to serve life's cycles and the spirits that governed them. But like all civilizations, the Mogollon's golden age carried within it the seeds of decline. As the 12th century progressed, climatic changes began to challenge their delicate balance with the environment. Droughts grew longer, rivers dried, and crops failed. Social pressures from neighboring cultures, including the expanding Ancestral Puebloans and Hohokam, altered trade networks and migration patterns. Some Mogollon communities abandoned their villages, moving into cliff dwellings high above the valleys, a final attempt to survive in an increasingly unstable world. Even as their way of life faded, the Mogollon spirit endured, carried forward in the traditions, art, and beliefs that would influence generations of southwestern peoples. Today, when archaeologists unearth a Mimbres bowl or trace the outline of a handprint on canyon stone, they are not just studying artifacts, they are touching the essence of a worldview that saw beauty in impermanence, strength in simplicity, and divinity in the everyday. The Mogollon did not need temples to commune with their gods. Their entire world was sacred ground. Their art remains one of humanity's most enduring testaments to the idea that creativity is not a luxury of civilization, but its very soul. Through clay and pigment, they spoke a truth that still echoes across the centuries, that to create is to remember, and to remember is to live forever. The desert has always been both a giver and a taker of life. For centuries, the Mogollon people had lived in balance with its rhythms, planting when the rains came, storing when the earth grew dry, and celebrating the fragile harmony that sustained them. But by the 12th century, that harmony began to fracture. The skies grew stingy with rain, the rivers retreated into the sand, and the once fertile valleys turned brittle and barren. Drought, the ancient destroyer of civilizations, had come to the southwest. The Mogollon, like many peoples of this vast region, faced the slow unraveling of their world. Yet their decline was not a sudden collapse, but a quiet fading, a civilization slipping gently into history's shadows, leaving behind whispers of beauty and mystery that time could not erase. Archaeological evidence paints a haunting picture of this transition. Around 1130 CE, the once thriving Mimbres villages of southwestern New Mexico began to empty. The pottery, once vibrant with creativity and symbolism, ceased to be made. The intricate designs that had captured life, death, and the sacred in perfect black and white simply vanished from the archaeological record. Homes were abandoned, fields went untended, and the sounds of human life gave way to the wind moving through the canyons. What could have driven a people so deeply rooted in their land to leave it behind? The answer may lie in a convergence of forces, environmental, social, and spiritual, that reshaped the entire ancient Southwest. The 1100s brought one of the most severe droughts in the region's history. Tree ring studies showed decades of declining rainfall, devastating agriculture-dependent communities like the Mogollon. The rivers and streams that had once nourished maize and squash turned unreliable. In desperation, some groups migrated north or west in search of more stable environments. Others sought refuge in the cliffs, building new dwellings high in canyon walls, protected from the sun and potential enemies. These cliff dwellings, such as those found at places like Gila Cliff Dwellings in New Mexico, represent one of the final chapters of Mogollon life. Perched above the valleys they once farmed, these homes offered both safety and symbolism. an attempt to rise above the chaos of a changing world. Within these shelters, the Mogollon continued to weave baskets, craft pottery, and perhaps still whisper prayers to the rain. But their numbers dwindled and their villages grew smaller, more transient, more fragile. The decline of the Mogollon cannot be understood in isolation. Across the Southwest, civilizations were shifting. The great Hohokam irrigation networks in Arizona were failing. The ancestral Puebloan cities like Chaco Canyon were being abandoned. A once interconnected world of trade, culture, and ideas was fragmenting under the weight of climate change and resource scarcity. The Mogollon, situated between these larger cultures, felt the ripple effects of this disintegration. Trade routes that once brought exotic goods, shells from the Gulf of California, macaw feathers from Mexico, obsidian from distant mountains, began to break down. Isolation replaced connection. Hunger replaced abundance. The rituals that had once ensured balance perhaps began to lose their power, and the people who had painted life into bowls now faced the silence of a world that seemed to have stopped listening. Yet the disappearance of the Mogollon was not a complete vanishing. Cultures rarely die, they transform. As the Mimbres villages fell silent, new communities began to emerge. Groups that carried with them the knowledge, traditions, and spiritual beliefs of their ancestors. Archaeologists now believe that the Mogollon did not simply perish, but merged with neighboring peoples, the Ancestral Puebloans to the north and the Zuni and Hopi tribes, who still inhabit parts of the Southwest today. In their oral histories, echoes of Mogollon life can still be heard, stories of migration, of survival, of following sacred directions to new lands. The designs once painted on pottery found new expression in textiles, sand paintings, and ceremonial art. The Mogollon's reverence for balance and nature lived on, transformed but unbroken. As the centuries passed, the desert reclaimed what had been left behind. Adobe walls crumbled into the earth, wooden beams rotted and returned to dust. But the art remained, buried beneath centuries of sand and stone, waiting to be rediscovered. When archaeologists first unearthed Mimbres pottery in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, they were astonished by its sophistication. The bowls seemed timeless, minimal, modern, and deeply human. Their simplicity of line and profound symbolism spoke directly to the modern imagination. Collectors and museums rushed to acquire them, often at the expense of sacred burial sites. Entire graves were looted, and the spiritual vessels that once guided souls to the afterlife were sold as art pieces in distant cities. The Mogollon, who had always created to honor life and death, were now reduced to relics on display, admired but misunderstood. Over time, however, respect began to return. Modern archaeology and Native American advocacy have helped restore dignity to these ancient creations. Descendant communities have worked to repatriate looted artifacts and to honor the Mogollon not as a vanished people, but as ancestors. Their art is no longer just seen as an artifact of a primitive past, but as a sophisticated cultural expression, an early American masterpiece. Museums like the Western New Mexico University Museum and the Maxwell Museum of Anthropology now preserve and interpret Mimbres pottery within its rightful context, as a sacred language of a people who lived in deep harmony with their environment. The story of the Mogollon has evolved from one of disappearance to one of remembrance. Today, when we stand before a Mogollon site, the weathered remains of a pit house or the faded handprints on a canyon wall, we are reminded that civilizations are not measured by their monuments, but by their spirit. The Mogollon may not have left behind grand pyramids or sprawling temples, but they left something more enduring, a way of seeing the world as sacred, fragile, and interconnected. Their pottery, simple and silent, still speaks with clarity, of love for the earth, of reverence for the unseen, of beauty born from survival. In a modern world obsessed with progress and permanence, their story whispers a timeless truth, that greatness lies not in what we build, but in what we understand. The desert remembers those who respect it. The wind that moves across the Mogollon rim still carries the same dust that once settled on painted clay. The same stars that guided their rituals still shimmer above the canyons at night. And though their voices have long been silent, their art continues to speak. not from museums or textbooks, but from the heart of the land itself. The Mogollon did not vanish. They became part of the story of the earth, their spirit woven into the very soil of the Southwest. In their quiet fading, they achieved a kind of immortality, not in power, but in peace. The story of the Mogollon does not end in the dust of the desert. It lives on, carried by the winds, guarded by the cliffs, and whispered by those who still walk the lands they once called home. For centuries, their memory slept beneath layers of silence until modern explorers, archaeologists, and local ranchers began uncovering traces of their existence. What they found was astonishing, not the ruins of kings or warriors, but the delicate remains of artists, philosophers, and dreamers who had woven beauty into the bones of the desert. The Mogollon, it turned out, were not forgotten by the land. They had simply become one with it. When the first Mimbres bowls were unearthed in the late 1800s, their designs shocked the world of archaeology. They seemed impossibly sophisticated, the work of a culture capable of abstraction, humor, and profound emotion. Each bowl, preserved for nearly 1,000 years, seemed to speak directly across time. A fish chasing its tail, a human and a bird locked in a cosmic dance, a pair of hands reaching for the sun. It was as though the Mogollon had been waiting patiently for the world to remember them. But remembrance is a complicated thing. For decades, the Mogollon were studied, categorized, and often exploited. Their artifacts were dug up and sold, stripped of context and meaning. Their burial sites were disturbed in the name of science and profit. Yet even through that tragedy, their art refused to lose its voice. It spoke too clearly, too humanly, to be ignored. Over time, scholars began to see the Mogollon not as a mysterious anomaly, but as a vital chapter in the human story of the Americas. Their work revealed that complexity does not require empire, that brilliance does not need cities of stone. The Mogollon had achieved a rare kind of wisdom, the understanding that art, spirituality, and survival are not separate pursuits, but reflections of one another. In their world, every bowl, every carving, every act of creation was a prayer for balance between earth and sky, life and death, past and future. Modern technology has deepened our understanding of this elusive people. Through radiocarbon dating, drone mapping, and microscopic analysis of pigments and clays, archaeologists are now piecing together a clearer picture of Mogollon life. We know they traded widely. Their pottery styles evolved through exchanges with the Hohokam, Ancestral Puebloans, and even groups as far south as Mexico. We know they were skilled farmers, potters, and builders who managed to sustain life in one of the most demanding environments on Earth. But beyond these facts, the Mogollon still keep their greatest secrets. We do not know what they called themselves, what language they spoke, or what songs they sang beneath the desert stars. What we do know is that they saw the world differently, that they believed art could hold the universe, and that a bowl could carry the soul to eternity. In the quiet corners of museums and university collections, Mogollon pottery now rests under gentle lights, admired for its beauty and mystery. But in recent years, new voices have joined the conversation. Voices from descendant communities who recognize in this art the echo of their ancestors. The Zuni, Hopi, and other Puebloan peoples of the Southwest see in the Mogollon not strangers, but family. Their oral histories speak of migrations, of people who once lived in the mountains and deserts, who painted their spirits on clay before moving north. For them, the Mogollon story is not a mystery to solve, but a legacy to honor. Through ceremonies, art, and storytelling, they continue the same sacred dialogue with the land that their ancestors began. The Mogollon may have vanished as a distinct culture, but their essence endures, in the designs of modern pottery, in the rhythm of ancient songs, in the quiet reverence for the desert that still defines the Southwest. As we look back through the lens of history, the Mogollon offer us more than an archaeological mystery. They offer a mirror. In their resilience, we see the power of adaptation. In their art, we see the beauty of simplicity. And in their disappearance, we are reminded of the fragility of balance, between humanity and nature, between creation and destruction. The Mogollon did not conquer their world. They learned to listen to it. They knew that every drop of water, every grain of corn, every breath of wind carried the spirit of life. It is a lesson the modern world is still struggling to learn. In an age of noise and consumption, the Mogollon whisper a truth from the past. That meaning is not found in abundance, but in harmony. Today, as the sun sets over the Gila wilderness or the rugged rim that bears their name, one can almost feel their presence. The rocks still glow with the same red and gold light that once illuminated their villages. The night air still carries the same silence they knew, a silence vast enough to hold eternity. In that silence, if one listens closely, there is a rhythm, the same rhythm that once guided their hands as they painted, farmed, and prayed. The Mogollon may be gone, but their spirit still dances in the wind, still hums through the canyons, still shapes the stories we tell about what it means to be human. Their rediscovery reminds us that history is not just about empires and kings. It is also about the quiet civilizations that lived with grace and left beauty behind. The Mogollon teach us that art can outlast time, that simplicity can hold infinite depth, and that the greatest monuments are not built of stone, but of spirit. In their bowls we find not just ancient symbols, but the universal language of creation, a language that speaks to all who have ever looked at the stars and wondered who we are and what we leave behind. And so, as we close this chapter of the forgotten civilizations of ancient America, we do not mourn their passing. Instead, we celebrate their gift, the enduring reminder that even in the harshest landscapes, humanity finds a way to create, to connect, and to transcend. The Mogollon culture may have faded from the earth, but its soul endures, etched forever into the desert, painted onto clay, and carried forward in the story of us all. As the last echoes of the ancient world fade into the desert wind, the Mogollon remind us of something timeless, that beauty does not need monuments and meaning does not need words. In every painted bowl and weathered handprint, they left us a message, that to live with the land is to live forever. Theirs was a civilization without conquest, without kings, yet rich beyond measure in spirit, imagination, and grace. They were the artists of survival, the poets of the desert, the quiet guardians of balance in a world of extremes. So the next time you look upon the red cliffs of New Mexico or the starlit canyons of Arizona, listen closely. The Mogollon are still there, in the silence, in the shadows, in the heartbeat of the land itself, forgotten by time, but never by the earth that remembers them. This has been Forgotten Civilization, your journey into the lost histories of ancient America. If their story moved you, join us again as we uncover more hidden worlds, lost peoples, and untold truths buried beneath the soil of time. Because the past is not gone, it's waiting to be remembered.